From books to movies, shows, and comics, we got it all and more to discuss. Why don't you join us? Welcome to the first and currently only episode of our newest podcast to discuss or not to discuss. I'm Nicole Hughes, and with me today is my sister Sarah. Today we want to discuss the real-life takeaways you can get from just reading Born a Crime. So, currently, you have not even touched Born a Crime. This is the first time you've ever heard of it. I have just finished reading it in my English 12 class. Now, personally, I absolutely love the book, so I would absolutely love to take this time to try and explain it to you. What? Why are you looking at me like that? What's wrong?
You get off your sweater in the middle of it.
Well, I was hot, thank you very much. Don't mind me getting excited about talking about a book. So, currently you have no idea about any of the things that goes on in the book. You've not touched it,
I
no.
just see a lot of paper notes coming out of the book.
Well, yeah, that was me taking notes for quotes, alrighty?
That's a lot of notes.
Well, yes! You want to know how many notes I had to take? Anyways, we're moving on. So, currently you know absolutely nothing about the book, do you?
No, I have no clue.
Do you know what I mean when I say apartheid?
No, I do not.
Do you know anything about the racism and colonialism in South Africa?
I know racism and colonialism, but I don't know what happened in South Africa.
Alrighty. Okay, so how about we start off with kind of basic plot summary of what it is.
Oh, wait! I do know the book!
You've seen it. I don't think you've read it.
I haven't read it, but I've seen it before.
So as I'm pulling up photos currently for listeners, love you to death. Currently I'm just pulling up whoops, click that by accident. I'm pulling up photos of what the cover for the book looks like. It basically just says Trevor Noah in big white letters.
I remember. Trevor, it's all about Trevor Noah.
Yeah,
right.
The comedian.
How the fact that he's like half white, half black, and there's a car.
Yeah.
Blah,
That's
blah,
the
blah,
main
blah,
part
blah.
about it. So the whole kind of basic synopsis is Trevor Noah's experiences as a child growing up in South Africa under the influence and restrictions of apartheid. That is a very floral and kind of basic thing of what's going on currently in this book. So, well, knowing this now and understanding and looking and kind of starting to connect, what's starting to come together for you? Any ideas? Nothing?
Repeat the sentence.
The question.
The question.
Is seeing the cover here bringing up anything? So do you think
yes,
you
I do remember Mom explaining it to, me at least, because I was wondering what it was, and I asked if I could read it, but she said no because it was too dark.
It is a bit dark, but honestly, it's really,
but that was
really
also
light.
3 years ago, so I was like 13.
Yeah, you were a tiny child, but it is significantly more. It's a lot more. I don't know why she said it was so bad. It's got some
she also didn't let me read
moments.
Hunger Games either.
Well, yeah,
or Divergent.
With all due respect, those are significantly darker than this book.
Okay, that also she didn't let me read Divergent though. Divergent's not that dark.
No. Okay, the worst part here is like the end here where it like explained how his mother got shot, but the entire thing is like actually, and then there's a part of him going to jail and there's like high talks about racism and whatnot, but like. It's fine. Trust me. It's actually not that bad because of
I love how you just just out of nowhere, just like spoiler. Totally. Mom dies at the end.
My bad.
Totally.
I should have probably led up to that.
Probably led up to that.
Well, he spoils it actually earlier on in the book. He in some of the first chapters.
He's just like, oh yeah, my mom died. Bang.
Well, actually, yeah, he does. He says in some of the earlier chapters. I don't have a quote for it, but he does say in one of his earlier chapters how he does have a quote of basically just saying that his mom got shot in the head, like some of the first chapters. I can't pull the exact quote up because I don't think I used it at the time. But
why exactly did his mom get shot in the head?
We'll get into that. How about we start and we'll kind of casually work our way up. Let's first start with the whole Born a Crime thing first. We're gonna work our way into that. We're not just gonna jump forth. I might have spoiled it, but he does that in his book as well.
You should see my reaction. I was
eyes bulging out of your head. Okay. So in the so as you were talking, there's the Born a Crime by Trevor Noah. Now it talks about basically the whole point of him being born a crime is being born as the son of a black woman and a white man under apartheid.
White males.
Yes. Okay. At the very beginning of this book here, after this, I want to show you this. At the very beginning of the book, see, you have Born a Crime. And look, that's him and his mother.
Aww,
it's adorable.
Yeah. He's such a good comedian, though. I love him.
I love his thing. I was so excited that we got to read this in class. So it's been on my to read list.
We love it that comedians, because mostly a lot of comedians get their like funniness from trauma. I've just noticed that.
Okay. Anyways, moving on. But like, so here's the thing that's great about him being a comedian. You see it throughout the entirety of the book. He uses comedy a lot as a means of kind of lessening the harshness and the severity of the trauma that he experienced. There's a lot going on here, and there's a lot of life lessons, but a lot of the more kind of traumatic and very hard things to read a lot of time are completely just kind of alluded to, or just the severity of them is taken away with how he uses his comedy and his satire to do it. And you can see it later on, and I'll read out a couple quotes to you in a little bit of some amazing ones I have here. So first off, I want to read the Immortality Act to you, which is the current one I have here, which is at the very beginning of the book. This is the main thing about apartheid. Immortality Act, 1927, to prohibit illegal carnal intercourse between Europeans and natives and other acts in relation thereto. Be it enacted by the King's most excellent Majesty, the Senate and the House of Assembly of the Union of South Africa, as follows. 1. Any European male who has illicit carnal intercourse with a native female, and any native male who has illicit carnal intercourse with a European female, shall be guilty of offence and liable on conviction to imprisonment for a period not exceeding 5 years. 2. Any native female who permits any European male to have an illicit carnal intercourse with her, and any European female who permits any native male to have illicit carnal intercourse with her shall be guilty.
Carnal?
Carnal, thank you.
Carnal? What is carnal? Oh, is it just a fancy and like less like what is it? It's vulgar way of saying just, having sex, pretty much. Yeah,
no, it's just the legal term of having sex.
Can't you just say intercourse?
Listeners, love you to death. I basically just showed a very distinct thing of putting my hand into a circle.
Can't you just go like this, though?
I did that.
You went like this.
I did kind of do that.
You look like you're giving a prostate exam.
Listeners, love you to death. I basically just put my finger in like my hand in almost how you do a Lego hand, and then I shoved my fist through it.
It looks like you're giving a prostate exam on sex.
Okay. Any native female who shall be guilty of an offence and liable on conviction to imprisonment for a period not exceeding 4 years. And not to say even though for him being born a crime. The second chapter is in fact called Born a Crime, and it does talk about the connection between his mom and his dad, his mom and his dad, and kind of how they got together and the whole thing about that. So the main things you need to understand here, which is built up from the very beginning, is Trevor is extremely close with his mom, and you can see just how it influences him as a human being with just high levels of feminism because of how strong his mom is.
And then she gets shot.
Okay, hold on a second. I'm pulling up some of the quotes for it. I just want to... Where is it? So, yeah. So, I'm going to get you to read. If you can read out the chapter lists quite because I think some of them would be really funny for you to read. So, if you can read them out loud.
Run, Born a Crime, Trevor Prey, Chameleon. Did I say that right? Like, did I read that right?
Can you not read the word chameleon?
I thought it was something different. I thought it was chamomile for a second. The Second Girl, Loopholes. What the hell is... I don't want to pronounce that wrong.
Foofy?
Foofy?
Yes, I'm going to explain them to you later. I just want you to read them out and keep them in the back of my mind.
Foofy.
Yes. Stop judging his dog's name.
No. Wait, it's his dog's name?
It's his dog's name.
That's a cute dog's name.
We're getting into it.
Robert. No, but the thing is, with Foofy, it kind of reminds me of when I was really high on sugar, and I thought, and they had the Boston pizza sign, and the Z was out, so I thought... For context, hold on a second. High on sugar does not mean any sort of drug. It just means that Sarah was on a sugar high. And I was overtired.
Basically. Okay, continue with your
story.
And
then I said Boston pizza.
We are very off topic. Hold on. We are here to discuss Born a Crime, not your insane patterns.
Boston pizza. Okay,
anyways. Okay. You didn't even finish reading it.
Foofy. No, Foofy. I want to go back to Foofy.
Hold on. No. Okay, we're getting back into it. I'm going to read you some of her quotes I have here. So first in kind of the couple ones. So the whole, so basically the main part here is one thing I absolutely love about Trevor's, how because I was talking about this, right, with how he uses his comedic language to kind of hide a lot more trauma things. One of the main things I love, and I can, what I call a technique called recontextualization, or I don't exactly know, I think it's illusion would probably be the more English term for it, but I consider recontextualization. There is something where basically the idea is you take something, think of this way, when you see this prompt where it's like, think of a sentence that you could put at the beginning of a book and then at the end of a book, and they can have completely different meanings based on the stuff happening within the book, right? Have you kind of heard of that, where it's
nope,
like...
I've never done that.
No, you clearly need to read more. Anyways.
Bruh, no! I've never done that sort of project!
No, not on a project, like read it in a book.
What?
Anyways, we're getting back to it.
No, I get it in a book, but I thought you meant a project. And I was like,
No,
what? No, I get what you mean with that, but like, I've never done a project like that.
No, I'm not asking you to do a project. I'm asking if you've ever read a book like that.
Yeah, no, I didn't.
Okay, anyways. Okay. One thing I absolutely, and he does it a ton, especially a lot in a lot of his early chapters. One thing I absolutely love about Run is there's stuff like, one of the quotes I have here is from earlier on in the book. It's page 18. Run. So I ran and she ran and nobody ran like me and my mom. It's,
my mom and I?
No, it just ends, it says me and my mom.
I know, but it should be my mom and I. Papa's gotten to my head.
Okay, grammar aside, anyways. So one thing that happens here is at the very beginning of the book, well, essentially, because it's the first chapter, right? We see a kind of thing where it talks about, first of all, one thing that you need to keep in mind in the back of your head is this Volkswagen, this car. Now,
Volkswagen?
This I think, it's a Volkswagen. I think it's a Volkswagen.
Volkswagen.
Volkswagen? Whatever the hell it's called. This kind of, I think it's a minivan at the time.
Yeah, a Volkswagen minivan.
Yes.
A Volkswagen van.
Why are you focused? Anyway, keep this in mind. Basically, one thing that he says early on, and I don't know if I have this thing. I don't know if I have this quote. But basically, I think the quote is something along the lines of, everything bad that has ever happened in my life came from that car. I'll get into it a little bit later. But basically, first thing you need to talk about is he starts it off, the very book was said, basically he talks about,
imagine blaming all your trauma on a car.
No, you'll see why. It's a major thing here, but he basically says at the very beginning,
listeners, she is flipping a book.
Sometimes very beginning, the first paragraph here. Sometimes in big Hollywood movies, they'll have these crazy chase scenes where somebody jumps or gets thrown from a moving car. The person hits the ground and rolls for a bit. Then they come to a stop and pop up and then dust themselves off. Like, it's no big deal. Whenever I see that, I think, that's rubbish. Getting thrown out of a moving car hurts way worse than that. And so it starts off with that, and he brings that up at the very beginning. And then he goes on this whole thing about going to church throughout the entirety of the book. Like, he talks about going to different types of churches, like going to white church, black church, mixed church. So one thing, and it continues on here with going kind of along the lines of, talks about the different churches. So he talks to, white church, black church.
What's the difference between them?
So he does go on about a bit of them, of kind of like white church, kind of like black church, kind of being like really praying, really get like kind of physically and emotionally getting into it.
Well, because they play a lot of music, don't they? Like, really,
yeah,
like,
it's not. It is kind of go here. Yeah. Where I think I have a quote about this. No, I don't actually. So I don't have a quote for this one specifically, but he does talk about the different churches and what kind of he experienced with them. But the main thing that you need to realize and kind of keep in the back of your head, that while he does talks about this, and now I love his writing, is he uses this as kind of a way to show the different racial in things while still keeping it in the back of your head. Like, it starts off, the very chapter starts off with a car. The car isn't working. The car breaks down. So he goes, and so they have to take all these buses there. Now, they go and take all these buses, and he's using this as kind of a way to explain all the differences with the unjust racism and kind of what each church is like because of that. And as it goes on, you see all them at different minibuses, and then with them getting on the last minibus getting home, because minibuses were run by kind of these, I think it was gangs at the time, they had to get on this minibus, and So it's him, I believe his brother Andrew, and his mom. Andrew brings up later. It's the first time we ever hear about Andrew, and he isn't brought up until like the very end. Do we know if
Andrew's like full on, like not mixed, but he's like full on?
Yeah, he is. It's explained later on, but here at the first time we hear about Andrew, it's the first time we hear about anything, and then he's just not talked about until like the last 3 chapters. So he's brought up later on, but that's the first thing. And it's him basically, they're on this bus and they end up getting tossed out and thrown into the bus. Now, partway through the beginning of the chapter, going back again.
Thrown under the bus?
No, he's thrown out the bus. Basically, the guy is like, the guy running the bus is like talking to his mom, and his mom gets the impression that this guy is going to try and rape her because she's got 2 young children. Something bad's gonna happen. So as he kind of stops to go to a stoplight, she pulls both their kids, throws them out, and jumps out herself. And then they run. Now here's the whole thing about the first part. Back earlier on in the chapter, there's this part where basically it's talking about him running away from his mom, about how him and his mom used to win all the competitions at his schools because they used to be the fastest runners. They could run for ages, and like this whole thing. So no one could run like him and his mom. That's the whole thing. So the first quote is, so the part of this quote here says, so I ran and nobody ran like me and my mom. The nobody ran like me and my mom part is from the very beginning of the chapter where he talks about how his mom and him could beat any running competition. This is then brought up again with the run, so I ran and she ran and nobody ran like me and my mom. It has now been turned, again, the recontextualization I was talking about, this has now been turned into him having to run for his life so he doesn't get killed and his mom doesn't get raped by a bus driver. And that happens a ton. Like, it happens a ton throughout the book. There's a couple chapters later, it talks about him pooping in front of, like, basically there's Trevor Prey. Trevor Prey basically talks about him, and again, another allusion to him, to racism at the time was, and I have this amazing quote.
What do you mean Trevor pooping? You can't just leave it at that.
Hold on, I'm getting into it. He has this, there's this quote that we have that basically, people at the time could just kind of like, white people, I'm trying to find the quote. The quote is basically talking about here we go, here it is. Which made my prayers the best prayers because Indigo's prayers get answered first. How do we know this? Look at white people. Clearly they're getting through to the right person. Page 40. It talks, and so that's brought up later. Because he could speak English, which was already an allusion and a subtle nod to the racism going on at the time through English and white people. This comes back up later after and this funny thing, and why I'm going to get you to read the book, because I'm not going to explain it fully to you, is basically him pooping in front of his blind grandma. His grandma couldn't figure it out, but she could smell and she could hear him doing it. So, he tucked it away underneath the garbage. His mom found it after their grandma was screaming about a demon, and Trevor didn't admit up to it, so they had to take it outside and burn it because they thought there was a ghost in the house and they couldn't have that. But because he could speak English, he had to pray himself away. Kind of thing. And that happens a ton with recontextualization, and happens throughout the bus.
That's really funny though.
Yeah, so we see, and the main thing here is one of the main items that kind of bad is this bus, right? Everything bad that's ever happened in his life comes from that bus, but then it's proven wrong.
A bus or a minivan?
Sorry, the minivan. Thank you. The minivan at the very beginning, the reason why it breaks down is the reason why he has to run away from these people trying to kill him. A minivan breaking down is what causes him to meet his mom, to meet Abel, which becomes a stepfather, who at the time seemed really nice and was a good change, but then we find out that he's abusive later on. And so this car
slay.
Yeah, but then it also brings good things. Like there's the entire chapter of
is Abel white or black?
Black. But that should not matter. He's just,
I'm just asking because we had the first thing with Trevor and stuff.
I'll explain it in a minute. There's I think it's Loopholes. Loopholes is the chapter basically where, no, I think it's Chameleon. Basically, his mom wanted to take him out, and again, I have another quote somewhere for it, of basically, hold on a second. There's this great quote that basically talks about what was it? Yeah, here we go. Because she would say, even if he never leaves the ghetto, he will know that the ghetto is not the world. If that is that all accomplished, then I've done enough. Page 74. Basically, it was after his mom had taken him out on all these experiences to go experience like different places and whatnot through the van. The van basically taking him to all these places where he learns to go on and whatnot. And so it becomes that good thing through all of that. And so it's used as that. And it's the reason why so many bad, but so much good has done for him. And it's kind of brought up again. It's a huge thing that happens throughout all of it. So it's really big in that way, kind of using it to demonstrate the good and bad in his life. But the big chapter, which is the second one, is the born a crime. And it basically talks about why he was born a crime. With apartheid, basically, the very thing of it saying man and a woman of different races cannot mix. They're not allowed to. And so he was born during that time.
But yet there was a mixed church.
No, they can't have sex.
Oh, but then how did mixed churches happen? Like, together? Like, they go...
No, yeah, it's white and black.
Oh, that makes more sense.
And then it gets into colored people later, because colored people did exist. He's colored. He'd be considered colored because he's not white or black. There's a whole chapter about it. It's, again, I'm going to get you to read it, because it is amazing. And I don't have time to explain all of it. If we could I'd sit and talk here for hours to you about this, because every single chapter continues to divulge and break apart the institutionalized racism and the blatant racism that is seen as a lot, and it's shown as a logic and just doesn't make sense and is purely there for power. And it's broken apart constantly throughout with all of his writing, just in how his different writing style and how he uses comedy and his roundabout ways to explain why it happened, why it doesn't make sense, and how it's completely arbitrary and wrong. So with going on about this born a crime, the main thing, it talks about how his mom grew up in a family where she was the first girl, I believe. She was the middle child and the first girl, which didn't really do much for her. So she got put out with a bunch of her cousins, where she was like with 17 other people, I believe, and they were all basically just working and didn't make any money, didn't do anything else, and she was just constantly working for this other person, was barely taking care of and whatnot. But she got herself out, she taught herself to be a secretary, and she got a good paying job because of it. She moved in with, she learned from prostitutes how to move into the white people's basement, because they'd rent them out, and a lot of prostitutes would pay with it for sex, but she just paid for it because she had a working secretary job, so she was bringing in a lot of money. It was after she had left her family, because she was making all this money. Basically, her family was mooching off of her and wanted her to keep paying for stuff, and she was like, I'm not having this, moved out on her own. Where she was living at the time, she ended up getting a better place, an apartment building under a white man's name, because he rented it out to her, and just down the way from her was a white man named Robert from Switzerland. And she met this guy, they met at a couple of clubs, they hung out, talked a bunch, and she point blank said to him, she goes, I want you to have my children. You do not have to care about these children. You do not have to love these children. I want you to have my children. I'm going to take care of them. I just need you to have the children with me. And he's like,
what? Why?
What was the way? She didn't think he was going to care about the children, so she just really wanted children to take care of, and she liked him enough that she was like, I want you to have children with me. Doesn't have to be, you don't have to care for it afterwards, but I want kids. You're going to give me kids. And so he was like, and apparently he kept saying no and no and no, and eventually he broke, and so he had kids with her. And after Trevor was born, he cared about him a ton, but they couldn't be seen in public together because Trevor was a mixed child, and white and black parents was completely illegal at the time. So he couldn't really be seen with anyone at the time. So not even his mother, or his dad, because then they'd have to walk apart. They couldn't seem like they were connected to each other. And again, it's explained in later on chapters, basically about how colored people, because of how they were at the time, they couldn't really be seeing be seen at the time here. I've got another quote I think you'll like from later on chapter. Yeah. Many colored people lived in this limbo, a true purgatory, always yearning for the white fathers who disowned them, and they could honestly be racist to one another as a result. It goes on a bunch of stuff. Again, there's a bunch of different things that goes on. There's a ton of different things about this. But it explains how he was born a crime and everything that he kind of was like that. And so it was him trying to experience. And that's kind of the main part that it goes into. Basically, what things would you, what do you think, because again, you haven't read it, but if you were to read this, what do you think you would probably enjoy the most if you were to try and read it?
I don't know. I think just...
Because I know you have a lot of the same interests as me. Like, I know for me, my absolute favorite thing about it is I love, like, foreshadowing or recontextualization. Again, that was the main thing
You love parallels.
Oh, they're amazing when you use the same thing, but then it means something completely different. And especially with how he kind of roundabouts his ways, I absolutely love it. It was my favorite thing. I knew I was going to enjoy this book before I read it, and then I ended up reading it, and I just absolutely love it. It has to be one of my top 10 books, for sure. I was wondering what you would think would kind of be the biggest, if you were to try and read it from what I've explained to you so far, what do you think would you want to see from it?
The trouble that he goes through and, like, the different, like, funny parts and how he tells it in his, like, comedian way.
Yeah.
I don't I like the foreshadowing as much. Like, I get that, and I think it's cool sometimes, but it's not as much as into you.
I know, it's kind of
you really love foreshadowing and parallels.
God, you have
you
no
idea. You should
idea.
see her when trying to watch a Marvel movie. Is the worst thing.
Oh no, but this is so much better than Marvel movies.
I had to sit next to you during Endgame. It was real bad. Yeah, I had to tell you to shush
Endgame's like
multiple times.
Well, because Endgame was like the end thing, right?
I should experience, and all I heard was, oh my god, did you see that? And I'm like,
that was me throughout the entirety of this book. Now,
but the thing is, you're reading a book by yourself. It's not like I'm looking over your shoulder. I'm trying to watch a movie peacefully.
We're getting off topic. So, and one thing I absolutely love at the very, very end of this book, and one quote that I know after talking to many of the people in my class absolutely killed all of us, was one of the very last quotes in this book.
Do not say the quote then, because I want to read it and kill myself already.
It's cute. I want to spoil it, but it's just the very last here. I'll kind of give it to you. It's after a bunch of stuff has gone down, and it's after this. It's one of the only truly, like, big sad things in the entire book. This entire book kind of uses humor as a way to allude to, but not directly like relating to racism all the time. It brings it up directly, and for months you have stuff like the Cheese Boy, which is like talking about how if you were Cheese Boy, you were well off, and whatnot. And there's
Cheese Boy is like Swiss.
No, just cheese boys in general. Basically, the whole thing it means is basically cheese boys. It means, it's alluding to the fact that if you could have a slice of cheese on something else. If you could have, like, an extra slice of cheese.
Rich boys.
Yeah, essentially. It basically means you had enough money to have an extra slice of cheese on your like a hamburger is something, but if you could get a cheeseburger, that's more money, right? You had enough money to pay for cheese on stuff.
Oh, but
so that's the
really
whole thing.
Stupid.
No, well, it basically
Cheese boys.
Yeah, it does, because it means
Chuck
that
E.
you.
Cheese.
It means you were well off.
Chuck E. Cheese is not well off.
What? No, it basically means you're completely overloading the fact.
Cheese boy.
It's talking about even though you were poor, you were the well-off type poor kind of thing. That's what it was alluding to. So you didn't want to be a cheese boy. You didn't want to be seen like that. You wanted to seem, because even though...
Did you want to be... So there's different hierarchies where it's just poor, cheese boy, poor...
and then actual well-off. And so it talks about that, because you didn't want to be a cheese boy, because the hood was kind of this community of people. Like, shit was going on, but, like, if you needed somebody, people would help you and you try to help them kind of thing. It was like a community. A screwed up one nonetheless, but it was community. So you didn't really want to. You wanted to be seen part of the hood. It was like this cool thing at the time. So
swag.
You didn't want to be seen like this like well-off person. You wanted to be a part of that. So I'm not cheese boy. I'm not cheese boy. But that's just one of the other things. Again, there's a lot that goes on with that.
Was he a cheese boy?
Yes, because his mom worked a secretary job, so he ranges between being well off at some points, but then there's other points where he's going through financial hardship and whatnot. So there's a lot of that. But you can see through how he uses comedy, even though there's so much like actual tragic things that's happening with like, and you can see it in glimpses later on in the book with how he gets like beaten up by some boys. He actually starts to really fear his stepdad with how he's abusing him. And other things, his comedy kind of overlays that and allows you to read and understand the hardships and the trauma and the experiences that he had to go through without like feeling kind of just really upset and sad all the time. You're laugh at it. There's a ton of really funny things in here, and he uses comedy as a constant way to nod to certain things without fully facing them head on. But then in other times he does face them fully head on. There is a chapter in here. It talks about the difference between Japanese and Chinese people and how they were perceived in South Africa at the time under apartheid and how they were there. It's in one of the forewords. Hold on. In one of the forewords, it talks about it and basically seeing I think it was Japanese people it was Chinese people because they were making all the technology at the time. Technology at the time. The South African government wanted to get in with them. And so Chinese people were considered white. And Japanese people were considered black. So because of the white, I think you've heard about it. It kind of talks about what we've seen in American history with like white only benches or white only benches for white people only. Only white people could sit on benches, right?
Oh yeah.
So Chinese people, because they were considered white under the South African government, could sit on these benches, but Japanese people couldn't. So you had an officer walk up to them, and so he jokes about it, and he goes, "You can't sit there, you're Japanese." And the guy goes, "Well, I'm Chinese." And he goes, "Oh, I'm sorry, my bad." He's not actually apologizing for being racist. He's just apologizing for mistaking him, yeah? Mm-hmm. So there's a whole chapter that talks about that, but it's kind of that comedy of going into it, of him trying to break it apart, or like him being in a jail cell. The foreword for that is his basically how he got let go as a kid. He shoplifted. He got let go as a kid because his officer called his mom, and his mom was like, I don't want him. He needs to learn his lesson for doing that. Keep him in jail," and hung up. And the officer was so stunned that a mom would ever do that, so he let him go. And so you have things like that, and it kind of leads into how his mom knew he was in jail the whole time, and she was the one that actually got him bail money to get out, but he didn't realize that. He thought he got away with it. There's a ton of moments like these, but kind of through all this hardship, and as you go on, the book does start to get more and more depressing as it does go on. Even though it does have these light notes and dark notes here and there, and it kind of goes like a roller coaster, the end starts to get really kind of sad, and you start to deal with like the big trauma of like, he had to sleep in a car at one point because of Abel's business. He was getting like abused by Abel at the time. His mom was having to put through that. He didn't want to deal with that, and there's a point where he just broke it off. Or a lot of these other things that were happening at the time of him living paycheck to paycheck when he was living in the hood, and a bunch of these different things. So as we get into it, as it gets to the other thing, it is ultimately him kind of growing past that and seeing that because of his mom, he was able to see a world outside of the hood. And he went on to that. He became a comedian. There's the entire Robert, which is chapter 8, is him finding his dad, and being able to reconnect with him and talk about him, and finding out that his dad had been putting up all of the times that he had been seen in newspaper for doing comedy. And his dad had been keeping tabs on him and loved him ever since. And there's a lot of those. So even though it's so sad, like his dad left, he wasn't able to see him because Abel didn't want him seeing him anymore, or there's other points of that. You can see that there's hope of him growing past that, him caring for his mom, after the whole incident at the end of the book with him getting shot in the head. He was the one who paid for it all. He didn't care how much money it was going to take. He loved his mom more than anything, and it ended up being the reason why it saved her life. And so
she's not dead?
No. I thought it for the entirety of the laugh chapter is so sad. You'll trust me, even though I'm spoiling it now, he spoils it at the beginning of the book. Like the first chapter.
Is she still alive?
Yeah, he's like, yeah, my mom got shot in the head. Well, she knows she's alive. He spoils it in the first chapter.
Fine.
Like, he spoils it pretty early on. Trust me. It's not... And so it's pretty startling, but he just moves past it quickly to something else. That's what his writing is. He'll give you a concept, he'll go on that concept, and it'll kind of just... You know how I talk with you, and, like, how we'll have conversations, and they'll kind of just derail, and then continue to derail, and then continue to derail, and then eventually we'll stop, and we'll come back to the original point, and see how all of that connected back into each other.
Yeah.
That's basically how his writing style is.
Pretty much what we're doing right now.
Well, this is actually the most focused conversation we've had in a while.
No, but his entire... About that, though?
Yes! We're talking about this. No, his entire point is, like, he'll start with a point, he'll derail and go in a couple different directions, but eventually he'll, like, come back to the original point, and you'll see that all of these derailings actually had to do with the original point, and had to do with a bigger picture and concept originally. So, because of this, and there's a lot of things in that we see, and it kind of, even though it's in South Africa, we do see a bit of it with the racism that was experienced in America, the USA, for example. With, again, we see there's whites only restaurants or whites only benches, and you can only have certain places and whatnot, and we do see a bit of that, and we can kind of compare it, but there's also another level to it with how it came to be, for example, with the different tribes infighting, and then colonialists coming over and just taking it over, and there's a lot of that. So because of it, it's a really big thing to talk about because of the racism going on in America and how it's continuing to get worse due to confirmation bias we see in social media. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So there's that, right? And we kind of see that. So, because of all that, it continues to get worse, and so kind of why I would really suggest you read this is not just because of the comedic style. I find it super funny, but it tackles big issues that, while our problem in South Africa and have been for a while, we can start to see that in America and other countries due to, again, social media continuing to further misinformation through that. So by reading this book and using it, it kind of tackles those ideas that we didn't that need to be talked about, and can be talked about in a way that actually keeps you focused and entertained on it, and really start to realizing it without, because a lot of people don't like to have that icky feeling of, like, talking about things they don't like, right? Like, when you get something, you're like, oh, well, I feel uncomfortable, I don't really want to talk about this, so why would I want to read it? Well, because it faces these problems in a way that isn't directly head on, but is alluding enough that it actually starts to pull apart the problems, we start to see that, and it kind of becomes an understanding of them. Oh, don't mock my physical presentation of how I'm using my arms. Don't mock me. You know absolutely about nothing. You are contributing nothing to this conversation.
It's fine. I've had a 12-hour swim meet. I think I'm allowed to just, like, sit here and listen.
So, because of that, it becomes a big thing about this. So you can kind of, it relates to the things happening in America right now. It's why I suggest it, because it pulls apart these issues. Stop it! Stop mocking me! Stop mocking my hand movements. Listeners,
hold it apart.
Listeners, love you to death. Sarah's mocking my hand movements and joking around with me. Anyway.
Hold apart. Just like my life is unraveling.
Deconstruct was the word I was trying to find. Deconstructs the issues going on at the time.
My life is getting deconstructed. It's unraveling.
We're getting... Oh, goodness.
My life is unraveling. So happy.
Yeah. But, again, this uses the issues of racism and how it's institutionalized, and then brings... Stop pointing at me. What do you want?
Anyway, keep going.
Not only does it mainly talk about racism, it also talks about, there's an entire chapter basically when Patricia, Trevor's mom, met Abel's family.
So finally I know her name.
Again, we don't really learn it until later on as well. It's just mostly his mom is talked about. We do learn it at one point. I don't remember her actual name, but her white name is Patricia. Stop looking at the dog. The dog's
No, that was funny though.
But yes, Coco was tired. Just like Coco is our dog, by the way. For context, Coco is our dog, and she's
not just a random human on the floor. That'd be really funny though.
You'd be a random human on the floor.
You call me small human.
Well, yeah,
you treat me like a dog.
We're off topic.
You literally told me to.
We're
come
off topic.
And whistled at me.
I was doing it to the dog. You just happened to be next to her. We're moving on. How is this? Yeah. So. There's a lot of talks about this, and not only does it talk about the racism, but it also talks about the feminism throughout the book and how much his mom impacted him. She was
girl
just
boss.
Well, yeah, actually,
Gas like girl keep, girl boss.
She had
not girl keep, gay keep.
The amount of stuff that his mom went through throughout the entirety of the book. That was dealing with her parents, dealing with her cousins, and having to go through that, having to deal with the racism to be able to get a job, getting through a job, having Trevor and having to go through that. She loves him unconditionally. You can see how much she really cares for him, but you can see how much a struggle it is on her, but how much she pushes past it and do it. And it's shown, even in the first book, the Trevor Run book, with going to all these different places, he tries to say to her going, oh, the minivan broke down. We don't have to go to church. It's a sign from Jesus not to go to church. And she's like, we're going to church. They get in buses and they bus all the way to each one of those, even though it's like 45 minutes to bus. So all of that, like, she was a very religious woman, but she was strong. What would happen
if instead having a child with a black man instead of a white man?
Well, it happens later on after she gets with Abel. Mm-hmm. So Abel is a black man, and she has 2 children. She has Andrew and Isaac. By the way, Isaac's my age.
What?
Yes.
So I was gonna ask when he was born.
So Trevor is born in 1984.
No, you gotta be kidding me.
Andrew is born in 1992, 1994, and Isaac is born in 2005. Why do I know he's born in 2005? Because Patricia gets shot in 2009, and in the book it says that he's 4 years old.
What the hell?
Yeah. So there's that.
In 2009, I was 3 years old.
Yeah. No, 2000. Yeah. No, what?
No, I was 2. I can't do math.
Anyways, the point being is, so he has 2 brothers with Patricia.
That's
and they're
weird though.
And both of them are black. It's not touched upon because, again, this is from Trevor's point of view,
like,
and it does have. Shush for 2 seconds.
That was 20 years ago. Like this? No, not 20 years ago.
It was 14.
No, okay, no, but originally before he was born, it was 20 years ago.
What?
No.
This book takes everywhere between when he was a kid, like when he was like 5 and 6.
No, but they're talking
all the way
about
till he was 19.
But you're talking about Patricia before he was born as well, and that happened 20 years ago.
Farther than that. That was when Patricia was a kid, so you're looking at like 40 to 50.
No, I'm talking about like when she met Robert and stuff. That was 20 years ago.
No, so that was over 40.
Didn't he meet...
Trevor Noah is 39 years old.
What the? He's 39?
He's 39 years old.
He's born in 1940...
1984.
Oh, I thought you said 1994.
No, 1994 is his brother Andrew. 1992 is his brother Andrew.
Oh, I misheard you. I thought you said, wait, he was born when Mom graduated?
I don't remember when Mom graduated.
1984. Anyway, yeah. Keep going.
So there's a lot of that, and we see that. But I think it's a big thing because not only we talk about how it talks about constantly throughout the book how much Trevor admired his mom, even though they had these things, you could see how much they truly loved each other. They were in it together. There was so much they had to deal with together, and they dealt with it together, and they were so strong for it. And you could see how much he gained from it and how much respect he has for his mom, and that's shown through how big just it is. So it's not only just hugely feminist, it's very anti-racist, and it kind of deconstructs a lot of major social issues at the time, and that is currently going on right now.
Do you think the fact that one of the siblings is your age?
That's not my point. My point is my point being is that while this does happen, and a lot of the things he experiences, again, are like almost 40 years old.
That's when he was born, Nicole.
No, but it was happening before he was born.
That's true.
He was 6 when Nelson Mandela got, I think, released. He basically
who is that? Nelson Mandela. I know faces. I don't know names.
Pulling up the face now. Hold on.
I can't. Okay. reader or listeners, whatever, which one. I can't tell like names. I'm very bad with names, but oh, right, got it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I didn't know who he was. I know what he looks like. I just don't know what his name was.
Yeah, basically...
Why was he released? Like, what did he do?
Yeah, I can't remember the exact thing about it. It's not fully explained because, again, he was 6 at the time when Nelson... I think he was released at the time. I think he was incarcerated for a bit.
Why was he incarcerated again?
Again, it doesn't explain. I don't remember. I actually don't know a ton about Nelson Mandela myself, but it does talk about a lot about... He did a lot of rallies and speeches, basically opposing apartheid and speaking out on the racism that was going on at the time.
Mm-hmm. Isn't he the president of South Africa now?
He was. He was president between 1994 and 1999.
Oh, that's cool.
And so he was 6 at the time when apartheid ended, but he was a largely anti-apartheid and spoke out about it constantly. So, where were we? Completely talked about it. But, like, the point being is that even though a lot of these things happened over 40 years ago, they're still very relevant today with what we're dealing with. And that's why I think this book is such a big thing, is because of the things that goes on here. It's talked about in a way that people can digest and look through and experience and is accessible to people because it is a highly published book, to kind of start to break apart and really start to understand kind of the underlying racism and why it's there in the first. First of all, the why it's there is because purely for power, and racism is completely illogical. And it's explained. It's heavily explained in the book, and it's kind of picked apart, and it's shown through comedy and other allusions to other pieces. It's such a big thing now with dealing with a lot of racism in the States that is currently going on, that's heavily institutionalized. That it's a really big thing that people actually read it, because it can start to kind of realize our own faults and how we can do better against them, and how we can try and help other people forward. We may not be able to help other people, but starting to read from experiences of one specific person under these instances can start to realize kind of what we can do just a little bit better to help ourselves. So, do you have any other takeaways from what I've explained?
No.
You got nothing?
I'm good. I think I'm a little... My brain's half...
Do you have any questions for me? Do you have...
When did he move to America?
I'm not sure, because I think he was touring around the stores for a while. It only gets up until, like, the very last point is, like, I think he was in his early 20s at the time, I think, is when it starts to end, and he said he was already moving around. It's not really touched. Everything that's talked about in the book mainly happens in South Africa.
Is his mom with him in America now?
I don't believe so. I think she's still in South Africa. That woman is really, really stubborn. I don't think I have another quote for you.
Oh my God, so many quotes.
I do. There's so many good lines in this book. He talks about, because he learns about colored people, and a lot of them moved away when apartheid was happening, so that way they could live with both parents. And he asked, so basically he was talking to a colored person later on afterwards, and he goes, wait, what? You mean we could have left? That was an option? Imagine being thrown out of an airplane, you hit the ground and break all of your bones, you go to the hospital and you heal and you move on, you find out about the whole thing behind you, and then one day someone tells you about parachutes. That's how I felt. I couldn't understand why we stayed. I went straight home and I asked my mom, why? Why didn't we just leave? Why didn't we go to Switzerland? Because I'm not Swiss, she said, stubborn as ever. This is my country. Why should I leave? Page 28. She was a very stubborn woman, so she wouldn't. I assume she would have stayed in South Africa at the time.
Oh. Yeah. Anyway, well, it was very
I
fun
highly
talking
suggest
to
you read it.
Yes,
it was on my to-read list for a while, and I'm so glad we finally got to sit down and read it in class. It's amazing.
Okay, I will read it. Anyway, thank you for having me.
Well, thank you so much for listening. That was the end of our discussion of Born a Crime. There's a lot more to talk about, but I think we should read that up.
You did most of the talking.
We should leave that up for you to read. We can only talk about so much in so little time. And it's a fantastic book, and I heavily suggest reading it in this day and age. With its, even though it is, I think the book's over 10 years old, but the topics talked about it are 30 years old. You're still relevant, but they're 30 years old, but they're still relevant today, and I highly suggest, if you haven't read it, I do suggest that you at least read about half of it, if you can all of it. Yeah.